Okay, here we go. Good evening. My name is Julie Deschamps. I'm the founder and chair of Waste Free Greenwich. On behalf of the Waste Free Greenwich team, I'd like to welcome you to Backyard Composting 101 with our master composter, Britta Kalkos. Before introducing Britta, I'd like to share a few announcements and housekeeping items. Please note that we are recording this session and the link will be shared in tomorrow's newsletter and be posted on the event page on our website, wastefreegreenwich.org. We will have time at the end for questions, so feel free to enter your queries into the chat. Britta will address them at the conclusion of her presentation, and we ask that you please stay muted. Because of the enthusiastic response to this webinar, we are organizing with Greenwich Botanical Center both an in-person workshop for adults in September and a kids composting afternoon for families in October. Please stay tuned for more details. Another exciting announcement is that Waste Free Greenwich is now officially a 501c3, yay! And as a nonprofit, we look forward to continuing to serve Greenwich, to engage, educate, and empower our community to waste less through prevention, recycling, and diversion. Reduction of wasted food is a main focus of our organization, and we actively promote various strategies across sectors, residential, commercial, and schools. We aim to prevent food waste in the first place through our Save the Food campaign and educational programming, and we encourage and facilitate food donation with our partner, Food Rescue US Fairfield County. You can read more about our Food Matters Challenge for businesses and the Zero Waste Schools program at Greenwich Public Schools on our website. Waste Free Greenwich helped initiate and maintains the town voluntary food scrap recycling program, which has diverted over 314,000 pounds of organic material, 314,000 pounds, okay, I did say that right, of organic material from the waste stream in the past 3 years and serves around 7% of Greenwich households. We also encourage backyard composting via outreach efforts like social media, exhibits, and workshops like tonight's event. We are targeting wasted food for several reasons. Wasted food has significant impacts on public health, the environment, and our budget. In Greenwich, food that ends up in the garbage is incinerated, which is an unsustainable process that pollutes air, water, and soil and disproportionately affects the health of low-income residents and communities of color. Wasted food takes a toll on our natural resources: water, land, biodiversity, energy, and labor. When food is tossed, all these resources used from farm to fork are wasted too. If food loss and waste were its own country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter behind China and the US, responsible for about 8% of global emissions. The average household spends up to $1,800 on uneaten food each year, and wasted food accounts for about 2% of our gross domestic product in the United States. Food is one of the heaviest and most expensive components of our trash to transport and burn or bury, an unnecessary fiscal burden for our community. The nearly 17 million pounds of food waste generated just in Greenwich costs about $1 million to incinerate. Food scraps are such a large component of our waste stream, making up over 22% of trash, almost a quarter. Connecticut's waste management system is at a critical point with the recent closure of Hartford's incinerator and aging waste infrastructure that is really costly to maintain. It's predicted that 40% of Connecticut's waste will be shipped out of state, raising tipping fees exponentially and negatively affecting municipal budgets. Eliminating food scraps from the waste stream is a promising solution to address this crisis. The good news? Well, each one of us can act to right the ship, and it starts at home in our own backyards. So I'd like to introduce Britta Kalkos, who will guide our way. Britta is a native of Greenwich who graduated from Greenwich High School many years ago. She currently lives in Old Greenwich, where she enjoys her empty nest with her husband. She previously worked as a preschool teacher at Greenwich Public Schools, where she encouraged the children to feed the worms instead of throwing their apple cores and banana peels away. Britta has been composting backyard composting for about 10 years. When she joined our Waste Free Greenwich team, Britta learned of the vast environmental impacts of wasted food and discovered in detail the hows and whys of the composting process and its benefits in the garden by participating in UConn's Master Compost program. Thanks so much. Britta, take it away.
Okay. Thanks, Julie. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you guys are here and interested in learning about backyard composting. I think it's a great thing, and I think it's super easy, and I'm hoping I can show you that as well. There we go. So in this presentation, I'm going to help you trying to understand just the basics of composting. I feel like if you understand what's happening, it'll be a lot easier for you to do the process. And then I will also talk about what you can and what can't be composted in your backyard. Talk about the different types of bins that there are and what you can do with the finished compost. There's a lot of information out there and you can go really deep into the subject, but this is just going to be kind of a basic overview just to give you kind of footing for what it is. But you should still be able to do backyard composting after this. So the first question is, what is composting? So composting is just the natural breaking down of organic matter into small pieces. And compost itself is a finished material that is very nutrient rich, that is great for enriching the soil. It's almost like a high-end vitamin pill or vitamin powder that you can put onto your yard. So if you think about walking through a forest and you think about how many trees there are in the forest, and if over the course of time, if those leaves every year, if all the leaves kept falling, which they do whenever they fall, if nothing happened to those leaves, you would be walking through, mounds and mounds of leaves. But what's actually happening to those leaves is they are breaking down naturally over the course of time. So compost happens naturally, even without our help. So when I was a child, I remember driving through the forest with my family and my father throwing an apple core out the window. And this was in the maybe late 70s, early 80s. And I was horrified by that because we were taught not to litter. And I was like, how can you throw an apple core into the forest? But now I know that that was actually probably the best thing that he could have done. Instead of putting it in a bag, putting it in the garbage, throwing it into the forest was actually the best thing to do, which is kind of the best thing that we can do. We can take our food scraps and we can put them back to earth. And that's the best thing that we can do for them. So backyard composting is just, we're taking that natural process and we're just creating a favorable environment to help speed up that process. So I kind of think about that people start composting for two different reasons. Either they're gardeners who maybe have a large amount of garden waste and they appreciate finished compost. So that's kind of one group of people that does backyard composting. Another group of people are people that want to divert the food scraps from the garbage. They know that it's not good to throw the food scraps away. And for some times, I personally find it's easier to throw it in my backyard versus taking it to Holly Hill or the farmer's market. So that's another group of people. So I myself started years ago, probably about 10 years ago, just for food scraps. And for years, I did nothing else. I have you can see the picture of the bin here in the middle. That's the bin. This is actually my second bin, but the bin I've had for years. And I would simply take my food and throw it in there. And that's all I did for years. I didn't use the compost. I didn't do anything else, but I wasn't throwing my garbage away. I wasn't throwing my food scraps away. And I was actually producing some compost out of it. So I think a compost is kind of like cooking. It's like everybody does it a little bit differently. There's kind of a ground, a core thing that you do in order to create something. So for composting, the ingredients are greens and browns, greens being a carbon source, such as food scraps, and browns being a nitrogen source, such as dried leaves. So basically you take these materials, you put them together either in a pile or in some kind of bin. You might need to add some moisture now and then, and you might need to turn it periodically. But that's basically how backyard composting works. So if you do any research about composting, they will talk about the different ratios that are out there. So brown to green. So these ratios, if you look it up online, these ratios can vary anything from 1 green to 2 browns, 1 green to 15 browns. They're kind of all over the place, these ratios are. And again, when I was doing it, I was sorry, lost my train of thought. I was just doing foods. I wasn't even doing any browns. And even now that I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing, I know I'm not adding as much browns as I should. So I was curious what other people were doing. And so I asked some of my friends, how often do you add browns to your compost bin? So these were some of the responses I got. When I feel like it, probably once every 2 weeks. I don't think I add them frequently enough. When I think of it, probably not enough. When it has an odor or when I turn it. And I love this one from my one friend. I'm not up on all my appropriate colors. So as you can tell, people who compost on a regular basis are really concerned about the ratios. So, and by the way, these friends that I all surveyed, I asked if they use their compost at the end, and they all said yes. So the thought here, or the lesson here, is that it really doesn't matter. If you want to get gourmet compost, if you want to get high-end compost, you can, really try to figure out the ratios. But another hitch is that not all food scraps are purely nitrogen, and not all browns are purely carbon. So it would be kind of hard to figure out the direct ratio anyway. But in general, you should be putting in more browns than greens. And I will go over what each one is. So again, looking back at our recipe, basic recipe, we have the browns and the greens. Have added more charges. And then what you do with that stuff, you put the material into the bin or the pile. So what's happening when these things are all together is that there are microorganisms that are actually eating up all of this stuff. There are worms in there, there's insects, bacteria, and fungi, and these are eating away at everything that's in there. So since it's a living thing, it actually needs water and air in order to survive. Actually, this, just one little thing. I think this graphic on the right might actually come from Minecraft. If you had anybody has kids that play Minecraft, I think you can actually make compost in Minecraft. So one of the things we talked about was oxygen or air. So there are different ways to get air into your compost pile. You can turn it. They kind of say you should turn it about once a week to allow the air to come in. At the beginning, you maybe want to wait a couple of weeks in order to let the microbes start in there on their own. And then in the wintertime when it's cold, you can store it a lot less because it's less active in the wintertime. So there are different ways to turn it. So One way is if you have a tumbler, and I'll go over the different kinds in a bit. The tumbler you simply turn. If you have an open pile or maybe one of these open bins, you can use a pitchfork to do it. Or if you have a bin that's open to, a closed bin that's open to the ground, which I had shown you at the beginning is what I have. There's a tool that's shown here on the right called the tumbleweed aerator. And this tool is fantastic, I have to say, for working on one of those bins, because it works kind of like a corkscrew, and that you can really dig into the compost and kind of pull everything up and let it mix together like that. It's also great for grabbing some compost out of the finished compost kind of out of the bottom and pulling it up. So this is called the tumbleweed aerator tool, and I'll think at the end we'll send some links, and actually it's on the website. We had put this on the website. It's about $50, so it's a little steep for what it is, but I think it's very well worth it. And then a note about grass. If you're going to put grass, like I've just been putting grass on a pile next to some leaves. If you put it into a compost bin, just be aware that grass is actually very high concentrate in water. And also because it's cut so thin, it can easily suffocate the compost. And so it doesn't get enough air. So I'd suggest either mixing it in or putting it aside or letting it dry, or mulch it on the lawn is what is another suggestion, of course. So what'll happen actually, if it does, I was looking at the word, what it was, aerobic. It becomes anaerobic if it can't breathe. And then you'll be able to smell it. So sometimes if you're walking by a pile of some drying grass or something like that, that's what's happening, is it's not getting air, and that's why it smells like that. So again, I was curious because I wasn't turning it often enough. I asked my friends, do you turn your compost? So my one friend said they turn with a pitchfork when I feel like it. Great to do it more often in warmer weather as it composts faster. My friend who has a tumbler said she spins it 2 to 3 times a week. Somebody said yes, but not enough, a couple times a year. One woman said, I think Jack turns it over once a season. And then one friend who has a bin system says she shovels out bin number 1, shovels it out of bin number 2 and shovels it into bin number 1. So that's another option. So water, again, if we think about the cooking analogy, again, living organism, it needs water, and you don't want it to dry out. So if you put food scraps in, food scraps are naturally wet. So it does produce, it gives you a lot of water. If you have an open bin, it's going to rain. You'll get some rain in there. They say to check the amount of moisture that's in there. You're supposed to squeeze it, and it's supposed to feel like a wet sponge. Now, I have never squeezed my compost, I have to say. I mean, I picked some up with a hand, but I haven't purposely squeezed it. But you can kind of tell. You know, it's kind of like when you're cooking or baking, you kind of know, what a wet sponge should look at. I think they say if you do squeeze it, you're supposed to be 1 or 2 drops that come out. So if it's too dry, add some water. Don't douse it. Just, kind of monitor it, just like cooking. You got to do some at a time. And then if it's too wet, you'll probably be able to smell it. And then you would just add more browns. And so also on another note, the temperature, they say what's happening as these microbes are working away, they're generating heat, and the microbes like the heat. So it has been suggested, again, if you look online, it suggested that you really need a 3 by 3 by 3 compost pile in order to generate enough heat. I don't think my bin is actually 3 by 3. I feel like it's maybe, no, maybe it is. Anyway, but it's, so ideally that's, you know, you would like something that's 3 by 3. The professional sites or the big compost facilities, they create these huge piles so they can actually generate a lot more heat. So that's why one of the reasons you want to create the heat is, first of all, just to get the microbes happy and to get the microbes really moving, but also it does kill off some of the seeds and some of the diseases. But your backyard compost pile, you're not likely to get high enough heat to kill off those seeds. And I'll talk about that a little later. So let's look at a closer look at the greens or the nitrogens. So one of the main things with greens is you have your garden waste. You have your flower petals, you have your leaves, you have your stalks. When you are putting this into a pile, you should make sure that they are not diseased, because you don't want that disease to spread into your compost. And you also want to make sure that the weeds don't have seeds. Now, the bigger facilities, if you bring it to like the town garden facility, the garden waste facility there, they can handle it because the way that they process it produces a higher heat. And so that's able to eliminate the seeds and eliminate the diseases. Another note on weeds, if you have invasive plants such as knotweed, I can't remember now what some of the other ones are, but those should actually go in the trash because the garden waste place doesn't want it either, because we don't want it spreading either. So I know it feels weird to put greenery in the trash, but that's really the best thing that you can do. If you put grass in, just make sure it's not treated with chemicals. Then another big component of greens is fresh fruit and vegetable scraps. I'll talk about that. So make sure I'm not missing anything. So for food scraps, for backyard composting now, which is slightly different than the town program. So food scraps, you realize that the primary thing that you're throwing out are actually fruit and vegetable peels. That is a majority of what's going to go into your backyard bin. You can also put in coffee grounds are actually great for it. Eggshells, napkins, or tissues. So a note on napkins, actually, if you don't, so everything needs to break down. So things like tissues are great because they are soft and they kind of break down easier. They're thin ply. But if you have like heavy duty napkins, you might not want to put those in there because that's going to take too long to break down, unless you know, I guess you could soak them in water to break them down a bit more, or you could rip them up, or you could put them into the town program. But you'll just realize that heavy duty napkins in your backyard composting probably won't break down so well. So things that do not go in the backyard composting, but are okay for town composting, and these are things that attract animals, are meats, fish, and bones. You can bring into the town program, but do not put them in the backyard one because they could attract animals. You don't want anything high in sugar or dairy. So what I do with these things is I have the compostable bags, which we sell. And then I just put those items in a bag and keep it in my freezer. And I really only have to go like once a month or something like that. So things that you shouldn't compost in either, because it can affect the health of the compost. Oils, though, some oils are actually okay for the town, for our food drop off, but and there's actually a new place at Holly Hill now, which is right next to where our food drop off, that accepts cooking oil. You should not put dog and cat feces in there, but you can actually do herbivore dropping. So if you have a pet that has like a straw bed or something like that, you could, like a guinea pig, or if you have chickens or anything like that, that can actually, the straw and the droppings can all go into the compost bin. Some things that I personally don't put into my backyard compost bin, just because I find that they're harder to break down, are things like avocado shells and pits. Though I think the avocado shells actually become very dry and can crumply. So you could put them in if you want. Corn husks and cobs. If you think about how, just the thickness of a corn husk and a corn cob, that I don't put in. Eggshells are actually supposed, eggshells are actually supposed to be good for the backyard, but I just don't like seeing all those specks everywhere in my compost when I spread it. And so I just choose to put that aside and bring that to the town bin. And you also shouldn't put in lots of citrus, because there can be too much acid in it, and the worms and other animals don't particularly like the citrus. And now for browns. Browns are, the major source of browns are probably going to be dried leaves. Otherwise, wood chips is another thing you can put in, or rotten logs, straw, such as pet bedding. I mean, one note on straw is I have found in the past when I put straw in, I find it doesn't break down all that well. I think it's very dry and again, pretty fibrous. So it takes a while for that to break down. But another good option is shredded paper or cardboard. Again, shredded cardboard, so that there's enough air that can get through. And the paper egg cartons is actually a great thing, I find. So my husband and I eat a lot of eggs, so we have a lot of egg cartons, and those are great because they fall apart fairly easily. So that's actually a great source of browns. So for people which have a lawn service, a lot of people around here have a lawn service. What happens when you want to have leaves is you don't have them, because the leaves have all been taken away. And so what is helpful is in the fall to plan and to keep some of those leaves behind, or keep them aside somewhere, so that you can have those throughout the year. So there are different ways to collect the leaves in the fall. You can have, one of my friends put together this kind of netting thing here to, you just take some netting, and you take some I guess those are garden stakes or whatever, and you wrap it around, and you just have a pile of leaves that you keep next to your compost bin. There is also this geo bin that you can buy, which I find very handy. So this is like $35 or something like that. And so you can keep your leaves in there, or you can just make a pile. But again, it's a great thing to do in the fall, just to keep the leaves aside, so that you'll have them handy for when you want to mix them in with your compost. And that'll give you a nicer compost. And I've said all these things that I haven't really been keeping up with, but I have recently started being more conscious of what I'm doing. And I have to say, even when I pay attention to it a little bit, when I added the water, when I added the browns, it sped up the process so much more. And I was really getting really nice compost with it. So this is, they're kind of different ways to do it. You can be really vigilant about it, or you can just let it be. And you can switch between the two. I mean, I do that all the time. Sometimes I just put my food waste in and that's it. And other times I'm really good about it. So that's the nice thing about, I have to say, that's the nice thing about a pile or a closed bin. The tumblers are a little different, and I'll get to that. So there we go. Just talking about the different types of composters or mixing bowls. So again, it's a natural process. You really could, you don't need to do anything. You could just make a pile and let it sit, and that would be fine. There is also these multi-bin systems, which is a more contained system. You could even just do one thing. I think so. If you look online, people use pallets from when supplies, like building supplies come, and they come in those wood pallets, which kind of look like the sides of these. You can take 3 of those pallets, set them up in such a way, and then you've got a nice little contained compost thing. So that's another, option that you can have. But the bin here that I'm showing, the 3-bin system, we actually have those in the back of almost all of our public schools. We had one of our founders had set this up years ago. So they're there. Unfortunately, they're not really being used, but just if you want to go take a look and see what, a big bin looks like, look behind most of the public schools and you'll see that bin there. And then the other option is the tumbler. This is a mini tumbler. I actually would not recommend this tumbler. It's tiny and I don't know. I bought it just to see what it would be like, and I would not recommend it. And then this is the bin that I have that I've been using for years. I got another one from my parents and they've been using it. And those have, I think has worked really well. And I'll tell you the names of those in a little bit. So when you're considering what kind of bin to get, things to consider is how much space do you have? You probably can't have one of those 3 bin systems. That just doesn't work in most backyards. Then it's a question of, do you want it exposed? How afraid are you with animals? I know that some people tend to go towards the tumbler because they are really afraid of animals. I have to say, in asking my friends, most people do not have a problem with animals. If you have an open bin, there might be some issues, but if you have either like one of these bins on the right, that's a closed container, and definitely not with the tumbler, I have not had any issues with the animals. And my bin is next to probably the home of a couple of animals. So, again, another thing to consider is your volume. So if you have a lot of, if you're a gardener and have a lot of garden scraps, then you might want to do the pile, just because if there's a lot of that waste, or you could even do 2. I'm almost sure I know people who do 2 of them, that it's like they have their garden pile in one thing where they put their garden waste, and then they have a bin where they do most of their food waste in there. And then the other question is, will you maintain it? Here, I'll show you here. So again, this is on the left-hand side would be a bin. This one underneath, my friend actually made, if you're handy, they're fairly simple to make, these bins over here. So these, but you could also do a single bin. You don't have to do a double bin or a triple bin or anything like that. You could do a single bin. But this will be open to animals. So you might get, you'll probably get squirrels or some other little critters in there. There's really not much work involved with it, but it could be good for high volume. So these closed bins here might be good for a smaller space. Visually, they might also appeal more to somebody. They're close to animals and low to medium work. And the volume, I have to say, mine has never filled up. I have a 65-gallon bin, the one that I showed you, and that really has not filled up at all, because what happens is as it's breaking down, it keeps the volume goes down. Yeah, food is mostly water, and so it's going down and down in volume as it breaks down. And then these are the tumblers. So the tumblers can be good for a small space, though I have to say that this one on the upper right is my friend's, and it's actually pretty big. Again, if you're really afraid of animals, that might be the way to go. But this does need to be rotated a couple times a week. And so if I've just heard a couple of not great stories of people who went away and then didn't rotate it, and then it was really icky inside, and they, had to get all that ick out of there. So I have to say, I'm personally not a huge fan of the tumbler. If you do go that route, you should definitely get a 2-bin system. So what happens is you'll kind of start your compost in one half of it and keep adding food scraps to that, and your browns, your leaves. And then at some point you'll stop adding to the one side and you will add it to the second side, and you will just kind of let that compost cure in that first bin. All right, so these are, and we'll send you some links to that, to this stuff. But so this is the geo bin. This is the leaf bin that I said was a good container for the leaves. This is the compost bin that I have, and this on Amazon is like $75. And then Black & Decker, I was actually surprised today. I was looking online just for recommendations. So this Black & Decker is actually on sale through FindSod right now for $100 if you're a rewards member. So I actually might get one just because I kind of like to do the process just so I can see what happens and explain to other people how it happens. So that's an option for you. Word of warning, most of these things you need to put together themselves. The rotators might be a little harder to put together. I think that other one that I showed you probably, I don't know if you need to put that one together or not. But this one, I will be at the farmer's market tomorrow and have a little compost corner there. And I will bring a sample of this bin in the middle and the geo bin, just so you can get a feeling for size. Because I know sometimes I'm the kind of consumer who I'm like, I want to see it just to kind of feel it and see what the size is and kind of think about where it's going to go and all that. So I will be at the farmer's market tomorrow with the sample of these 2 bins. So now we've kind of seen what's outside now. I know another thing where people don't want to do the composting is they don't want the food container on the counter, or their spouse or partner or whatever doesn't want the food container there. So there are, people have put it under the sink. They put their food containers on the sink. Well, let me talk first about what the options are in terms of containers. So this one on the left is the one that we sell, the Waste Free Greenwich sells at the farmer's market, or send us an email and we can figure out how to get it to you. So we sell this little one here at cost for $5. So this is a great little bucket. It's a great size. It cleans out easily. So I actually have 2 of these in my kitchen. I have one for my regular compost, backyard composting food scraps, and the other one that I have for my eggs and avocados and things like that. So that's one option. Find us and get the little bin. So this was another one I saw online that I thought was kind of cute. So it's just like it's a metal bin, but it has a plastic piece inside. So you can, put this bin, on your counter, under your sink. People come to drop off their food scraps with us for our program. They have plastic containers. You do want a lid on it. So that is one thing you would want. And another thing with my bin, when I do those egg cartons that I was talking about, I put that on the bottom because I feel like that helps sometimes with the moisture. So when you bring it outside, as your bin fills up, for me, it's every couple days. You probably want to bring it in every couple of days because admittedly the bin, if depending on what you have in your compost bin, it could get a little smelly, like in just the kitchen bin. It doesn't smell outside. Actually, that doesn't smell at all. But your inside bin, if you let it sit too long, could get a little smelly, especially if there's a lot of moisture in there. So you probably want to bring that out every couple of days. And actually, before I forget, another note on our collecting stuff inside is you actually can't put the bags in our compostable bags, can't go into your backyard compost because it doesn't generate enough heat to break it down. And also you want that air in there. And so if it was tied in a bag, which is one reason why garbage is so horrible, because we're tying everything in a bag and throwing it away. But so you unfortunately can't use the compostable bags because they won't break down in your backyard bin. You could use like a paper bag, but if you use a paper bag, just make sure to like dump the materials out. Don't close up that bag, just to make sure that there's enough air circulation happening. Again, so inside, once you bring it outside, you put your food scraps in the bin. You can give it a stir. It's maybe when you can add your browns, kind of monitor if it needs some water or not. What I've done sometimes actually with the water is I'll might even have some rainwater that's collected somewhere and kind of clean out the compost bin with that water. And then, put it into the compost pile. Again, you'll start to kind of see what's right and not right. I mean, think about if you squeezed it, would a drip of water come out? I don't think I usually get my compost that wet, but and it still seems to work. But if you do that with cleaning the compost bin out with water, you might want to leave it out to dry or just wipe it down with a paper towel. Because if it's wet and then you're putting food into it, it's more likely to get smelly earlier. So it's better to dry it out or wipe it down. And another thing you can do is you can add a handful of browns to kind of cover it up, just also that kind of, if there's any kind of smells or something in there, then it deters the animals. So when do you know when your compost is ready? So when your compost is ready, it will look and feel like soil. I mean, when I bring finished compost around and show it to people, they're always amazed. Especially the children, are always like, oh, wow, that's dirt. Well, it's kind of a very special dirt. It's like a very high nutrient dirt. It'll smell very earthy. And they say you're not supposed to see any pieces of food. What I've found has happened when I take my compost out to see if it's finished or not, there's always kind of something in there that's not quite decomposed yet. And so that, or broken down yet. So that you can just take that out and just throw it back in the compost bin, or if you want, you can bring it to the town program. So you should be patient. It can take, it can take 2 months to a year. If you're really doing everything you're supposed to do, it will happen quicker. A new compost pile will probably take a little bit more time at the beginning, just because it needs time for those microbes to grow in there. But then once it's going, it'll keep going. I guess it's kind of like a starter, a sourdough starter. And then in the winter, it really doesn't do much. It's just too cold. The microbes aren't really super active. And so it's just more active when it's hot out. So this is my father, my 80-year-old father, who for years, they also live in Old Greenwich, and for years they would bring their compost to my backyard. Or their food scraps, I should say, sorry. They would bring their food scraps to my backyard. And then at some point, I think they were afraid of the animals. They didn't want to put it in their backyard because they were afraid they were going to get animals. But when they saw that mine didn't have any animals, they decided to finally set one up in their backyard. So my father, every time I go over there, he's like, oh, come see the worms. Come see if there are any worms in there. So it's actually kind of funny to watch. So, and another note, if you want to speed up your compost process, you can cut it into small materials, and then that helps the whole process, breaking it down. If you think about breaking down something large versus something small, the smaller is easier to break down. And then, so, your compost is done. So for me, how I get my compost out is like I use my turning tool, my little big corkscrew thing. I pull out a bunch of compost. I'll put it into like a bucket or something, probably take out whatever big pieces are in there. And then I use my compost. So different ways you can use your compost. You could just sprinkle it in your garden bed or your flower bed. You can sprinkle it on top or mix it in to your flower, your flower or your vegetable garden. Sometimes it, looks a little different. So you might want to dig it in a little bit. You could gently rake it into your tree beds. You could, inside, you could blend it in with potting soil. I have to admit I've done that. And then I've ended up with a couple little tomato plants inside next to my, nice indoor flower plant. But, I thought it was kind of fun. And if you don't like it, you can just pluck it out pretty easily. You can spread it on the top of your soil of your lawn. Or you could just leave it in the bin. I mean, that's what I did for years, is I just left it in the bin and it was fine. It, kept breaking down. So it kept getting lower and lower. So you can just do that, or ask a neighbor or a gardening friend. I'm sure they'd be thrilled to have your compost. So what time is it actually? So just to review, you don't want to throw your food scraps away because that's not a good thing, because it has a negative impact on the environment. Backyard composting is an easy way to divert most of your food scraps. Backyard composting is like cooking, and everyone does it differently. You know what, since I'm done earlier than I thought, I actually, I have some other slides here that I think might be helpful for some people. So I hope you don't mind, Julie. I'm just gonna, since I feel like I have a few more minutes, I'm gonna do this because it might help people. So one of the questions might be where to put your bin. So a bin should be like this kind of one that I have, should be open to the earth so that the microbes can get in. The tumblers, obviously not, the other ones. What some people do if they're, again, afraid of some animal or something coming in from underneath, is you can put down like netting or something underneath it so that it is open to the ground, but certain critters can't come in there. That's one option of how to do it. You want it to be close to your house. close so it's not too inconvenient. I mean, again, this isn't tumblers, these are other ones. You don't necessarily want it next to your building, so excessive water doesn't drain into by the house or anything like that. So, you know, under kind of half under a tree, you know, it's the sun, it's the heat versus cold thing. So, you know, it's nice to get some heat, but not too much heat. I actually have another bin that's completely under a tree, and that seems to work as well. So you can kind of tuck it in a corner somewhere. You do want to make sure that the area is well drained. And I mean, close to a water source, but I mean, you can always take a bucket over there. So actually, I'm not too concerned about that. So when you set up the bin, you're basically, I'll make this my last slide. You're basically adding your layers to it. You usually start with a layer of brown just on the ground to make sure that it can aerate. So sticks or something like that is good. Like not big sticks, but you know, little sticks are good. And then you could add a layer of green and some more brown. Leaves are usually good. Leaves are actually great. Leaves are shredded paper. Then some more greens. Then you would water it until soggy, and then leave it for, at the beginning, you know, you should probably leave it for probably a couple days in a week. I don't know. I find that hard. It's been 10 years since I started mine. So, but, so that's the basics of it. Things you could add, you can buy worms online to add to it, but you don't need to. The worms will probably come, the worms and creatures will come on their own. If you know somebody who has some compost, maybe they can give you a little bit of compost that already has the microbes. It's kind of like the sourdough starter thing, that you have those microbes in there that kind of helps to jumpstart it. Or you could add some soil from your garden, and that's another thing to add. So I think we are basically out of time.
Britta, we do have a question. We can go over if everybody wants to stay. The question is, can you please explain the 2-bin tumbler? Do you want to move composite to other side?
So the 2-bin tumbler would be, you don't have to move it. So what happens is it's like you're kind of closing a compartment in it. So there are two sides to it, and it has like a wall in between. Is what I actually haven't. So I've seen pictures of the outside, but I haven't actually seen. I don't think I've seen the inside of it. So there's a wall in between here. So what would happen is you would be putting your stuff on one side, and then at some point you would stop putting it into one side of it, and you would just start using the other side of it. And then eventually to get it out, I think you put like a bucket or something underneath here. I think there are even like special bins you can buy or special things you could buy, and then you just kind of turn it to dump it out of there. And another note here, actually, I'm noticing this is a 40 gallon. So that's kind of interesting because that's not huge. I mean, there are pros and cons to both of it. Mine is 65 gallons. So if you're going to buy a bin, just look at the size to kind of get an idea of what the size is. So the 65 bin, which was the same one this is the same one my father has. I mean, it looks like a small, like a half-size garbage can kind of. And that seems to work well for a regular household. 30 gallon, I mean, that's interesting. So it's so I mean, I think I'm probably going to buy one of these, and then maybe I'll bring it but it'll take probably a little bit to get, because I'm kind of curious myself how it works.
There's another question. Is there a small bin you can recommend for an apartment versus a larger house? And if you do have questions, you can type them into the chat.
Well, I mean, I don't know if they don't mean an inside or outside bin.
Randy, do you specify?
Yeah, I mean, if it's an apartment, I know that question actually comes up a lot at the farmers market. People are like, "Oh, I'd love to do it, but
it's an inside bin."
An inside bin. This one's pretty small. I mean, our waste free one is, you know, pretty small. I mean, I put some scraps today in like a jar. Was it like a plastic container that you would buy soup in or something like that. I think I bought soup at the farmers market and it came in one of those plastic containers. So you could even do that. I mean, basically any container with a lid in it, that's really the only thing. So that unfortunately I don't have, except for this bin or like a plastic old soup container or something like that. That's the only thing I can think of right now.
Yeah, our bin that we sell is, I think it's 2 gallons, and I usually fill it up like 2 or 3 times a week. But it depends, how many vegetable scraps you're using. But people use everything, even a bowl on the counter, if you want to empty it, daily or several times a week works.
Right. Oh, right. We have a couple of people that come with their metal bowls.
Yeah. And there's another question from Lisa. How do you manage a 3-bin system?
So the 3-bin system, I guess it's kind of like the tumbler. So it would be that you start with the 1 bin and you add the layers, you add your browns and your greens. I mean, usually you probably have a lot of yard waste. If you're using a 3-bin system like that, you probably have a decent amount of yard waste. And so the thought there is that you kind of fill up the first bin, and then at some point, I'm guessing maybe, a couple weeks, months, kind of depending on the season and lots of other things, you would take that from the first bin and put it into the second bin. So I think it's better to turn it periodically, but most people don't. Most people don't. But the way that a good way to do it is to take it from that first bin, bring it to the second bin, turn that periodically. And meanwhile, with the first bin, that's what you're using to put your fresh stuff into the first bin. So the first bin is kind of the active bin. Then in the second bin is kind of the in-between bin. So that'll maybe stay there for a couple weeks or months, maybe turn it periodically. And then eventually that goes into the third bin. And the third bin is kind of where your finished or almost finished compost is. So it's just about time to give it time to do its process without always adding something new to it. So I hope that answers that.
Any other questions? You can raise your hand too. Okay. And we are recording this, so and I'll send it out tomorrow in tomorrow's newsletter, and it'll be on our webpage, wastefreegreenwich.org, underneath the events pages. Rita, do you have any concluding comments?
No, I mean, thank you. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you came to realize that it's, not so hard. And again, nobody does it the same way. It's all, all kind of casual, or whatever you want to call it. And then, yeah, also I'll be at the farmer's market at least tomorrow, and I'll have some sample bins there. And then if anybody has any questions, you can just, send us an email. So.
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good job, Britta. Thanks everyone for coming. Happy composting.
Bye.